In today's video, I'll be revealing why retiring at age 60 with under $1 million is not only possible, but may be more achievable than you think, despite what conventional retirement wisdom tells you. I've analyzed hundreds of retirement plans over the past decade as a certified financial planner, and I've discovered that having a written financial plan that is uniquely yours, important point, can make retiring with under $1 million at age 60 surprisingly possible when you understand the key variables that most people tend to overlook and understand what your plan has to have and include. That's exactly why I'm making this video, to show you the specific scenarios where retiring at age 60 with under $1 million works, the options that you have, and why the $1 million benchmark is often misleading. And lastly, how to determine if you can actually make this retirement timing work for you with your current savings level. So without further ado, let's jump on in. I want to introduce you to clients of mine, Steve and Michelle Smith. Now, their names have obviously been changed, but their story is 100% real. You see, 3 years ago, this couple, they walked into my office with a problem that they were facing that keeps millions of Americans up at night, which is they had $850,000. They had done years of disciplined savings, maxing out their 401ks, building up their brokerage account. Again, doing everything right. But here's what was eating at them. They did not believe that that was enough. In fact, they were embarrassed when I first met them and afraid that they would have to keep working forever until they hit that $1 million mark. Now, everywhere they looked, financial magazines, YouTube, online articles, even investment advisors that have firm minimums, the message was all the same. You need at least $1 million to retire, and that's the magic number. And that nagging voice in their head kept saying, you're never going to be able to retire until you hit that number. You're going to be forced to work forever. And they couldn't shake that feeling. It came with a lot of guilt and heaviness and shame that if they didn't hit that $1 million mark, then they were never going to be able to retire. Now, despite decades of smart financial decisions, they felt like failures. And in my opinion, the real tragedy is that they actually had no idea how far they had come, where they were at in the process, because they didn't know their numbers. In fact, no one had ever shown them how close they were to retirement. They were willing to sacrifice more years based off an arbitrary number that they heard in the media without ever backtesting it. And that's the sin right there, is to think that you have to continue to work and work and work or aspire to a certain magic number without ever running it. And that is why we're making this video today, is to show you exactly what happened for Steve and Michelle once we ran the numbers. So let's dive on in. Now, if you feel like you're in a similar situation to Steve and Michelle in this video where you're not exactly sure about retirement and where you stand, what I want you to do is click on the link in the video below after watching this video, and I will send you a personalized Loom video analyzing your situation and showing you how to plan for your retirement. Now, back to our regularly scheduled broadcast. The pressure of not having enough was beginning to crush Steve and Michelle. You see, each and every day they were consumed by this anxiety. Steve would pop awake at 3 a.m. with his mind racing, thinking, just can't keep living like this. I'm not passionate about work anymore, but what if we run out of money and retire too soon? Or I don't want to become a burden to our children. Meanwhile, Michelle, she'd go the other direction. She would just avoid conversations altogether about retirement when it would come up with peers or anyone would mention it. She'd make excuses and change the subject. It wasn't great. That shame was eating them both alive, and they knew something had to give. And so together, they sat down at the kitchen table, got out the calculator, the legal pad, the pencil. They chose to work 7 more back-breaking years because they thought at the time the best strategy was to work until they received their full Social Security benefit. They played it safe. When I first heard this, my heart sank, and I am so happy that I met with them early on and not year 4 or 5 into this process, because what I found was here was a couple willing to push through, to put the nose to the grindstone for 7 more years, wasting potentially their most valuable years of retirement. Because by continuing to work, they were going to miss out on being the energetic grandparents that they always wanted to be, or skipping those bucket list trips while they still had their health to do everything that they wanted to do, all because they believed they had failed to hit some arbitrary number like $1 million that they heard on TV and read about online. But here's what Steve and Michelle didn't know. They had options, real, actual viable options. They just didn't know it yet. And so that's what we're going to dive into in this next part of the video, is laying out all the different options. Now, before I do, Now that you've seen how this was impacting Steve and Michelle, this next piece is especially important because I'm going to show you exactly how to implement this advice directly into your retirement plan. Now, for Steve and Michelle, they've done a good job saving. As we discussed, there's nothing to hang their heads on. They have $850,000. And more importantly, what I like, if you've been watching my videos, is they had it spread out between two different types of taxation. They had the brokerage account right here at $254,000, and everything else was in pre-tax retirement account. But they never asked questions on, when do we take Social Security? Should we sell our house? See, Steve and Michelle, they had no mortgage. Do they want to work part-time? Could Steve go into consulting? Could Michelle substitute teach? Whatever it is. See, retirement planning, it's about flexibility and options, but they got really discouraged when they started thinking about, well, if we try at 60, we're not going to have healthcare. That's just yet another expense, and we certainly can't afford that. And then lastly, where do we even begin to take our dollar out from? Each account's taxed differently. We don't know where to do that. And so as we look at their facts, what we could see here is that, well, they both were going to receive Social Security, so no pensions. Initially, it was believed that they were both going to take it at 62, and we talked through the idea of, well, because Steve's is going to be larger, what about the idea of having Michelle go first? We'll get some income in, less stress on the distributions from the portfolio. And should Steve pass first by taking it at 70, Michelle now receives his full benefit should he pass away first. So we looked at a couple different Social Security strategies. They were spending about $6,000 a month after taxes, and then they needed to factor in $1,500 a month for inflation. So when we look at $7,500 a month, that's pretty expensive when we figure out where is that money going to come from. Now, just as they supposed when we started running the numbers, they weren't wrong. $850,000 wasn't enough today at age 60. This is where their source of disappointment was coming from. And if they wanted to put their nose down to the grindstone for another 7 years, yes, they were on track to retire. But when we started working with them, we said, retirement's about options. You've done everything right. Let's talk through, what does it look like if the two of you work part-time? Somewhere between $2,000 to $3,000 a month, and all of a sudden, for the next 5 years, again, less stress on the portfolio, and you're able to retire. You're able to call your own shots, or hey, you don't have a mortgage. Your house is worth $750,000. It's just the two of you. You can move into a condo. You can go chase grandkids around throughout the Midwest or in Florida and downsize your house in California. And guess what? That works. You're okay. So it was all about having options for Steve and Michelle. When do you take Social Security? Where should I take my first dollar out from? Should we sell the house or continue to work part-time? And that's the beauty of financial planning, is understanding what is most important to you. And once we've solved for that, we can build the plan. I say the planning is the easy part. Solving for what's most important to you is only something that you know. So for Steve and Michelle, we pulled up a basic cash flow report. We said, hey, let's figure out how much money you're actually taking from your portfolio on a monthly basis, and if this plan works. Now remember, if you watch my videos, you know that our distribution rate, that's the money that we pull from our portfolio, wants to be somewhere between 4 to 5.5%. So the money, our withdrawals, when we divide that by our total portfolio assets, it needs to be below that 4 to 5.5% figure. So for Steve and Michelle, when they came in at age 60, there's no way, based off current circumstances, they were able to afford retirement. Now, again, we have a couple different options. Work longer, sell the house, spend less, whatever it is. Now, when we look at some of these options, we can see, well, if they were to sell the house, we already ran the probability analysis, but now when we start to look at the year in which they sell their house, okay, well, we're at 7.5%. That's still a little high, but we're not going to be there forever. In fact, as we have more income coming in from Michelle's Social Security and then eventually Steve's, we begin seeing this number start to come down. And then all of a sudden, once Social Security kicks in for both of them, they're now under 2% for the rest of their lives. And so we could begin to see here how these different options, whether it's selling the house, working part-time, begin to give their portfolio breathing room. This is a great list of different options that Steve and Michelle have available. And so when we cross-check against a different software strategy where we see, okay, well, now that these numbers work, how much can we actually spend and pull from our portfolio in a good market, in today's current market, and then if we experience a nasty bear market, how do we need to make adjustments? So we could see for Steve and Michelle, we could spend $5,700 after accounting for taxes. plus another $1,500 to account for healthcare. So somewhere around that $7,500 mark is what they could peg their current spending to be. And if there was a nasty bear market, well, they needed to adjust their spending temporarily. Now, what we also wanted to see was if that's what they could spend on any given scenario today, how does that change when they sell the house? Well, we could see by selling the house, they now have more options. It gives them $1,200 more a month of cash flow. Same thing if they choose to work part-time, because what's happening here in both of those scenarios is we're adding money into the portfolio, or in the case of working part-time, we're not putting out so much stress on the portfolio and taking more money out. We're living off our paycheck by continuing to work just a little bit longer. And then lastly, for Steve and Michelle, they needed to have a plan of where do we take our first dollar from? And conventional wisdom over here on the right is going to tell us, well, we're going to take it from our brokerage account. That's taxable, tax that capital gains first, and then our IRA, and then a Roth if they have one. In their case, they didn't. But what we found was because they were going to be in such a low tax bracket before Social Security kicked in for Michelle and certainly Steve at age 70, they could actually start taking money out of their IRA and 401k and 403b, their pre-tax assets, at a much lower 12% tax rate, and take that first to eliminate or help offset and lower future required minimum distribution. So we have to have a game plan. Again, it comes back to understanding what are our options. Financial planning is equal parts arts and science, and it's the idea of solving for what's most important to you, solving for that first, and then building a plan around that. So for Steve and Michelle, we now know that they have options. When we go back to their plan here, we could see very successfully, whether it's selling their house and downsizing or working just a little bit longer part-time, they have options to make it work. And so all of a sudden, they're now walking out of my office, head held high, ready to go. Retirement, it's not a number. It's a feeling. See, retirement is not based off an arbitrary number. It's making sure you know your number and that it makes sense. And so now that you understand why retiring at 60 with under $1 million is not only possible, but potentially optimal when you implement strategic planning strategies uniquely designed for you, you can now use this advice to further optimize your retirement plan. If you have questions as you go through this, again, click on the link in the description below and we will send you a personalized Loom video based off the survey that you fill out, answering questions for you on how you can optimize your retirement plan. Again, I hope you found this video to be helpful, and I'll see you at the next one.